Hello, everyone. This is criminal profiler Pat Brown, and just now we had some breaking news, exciting breaking news, that there has been a suspect identified, or shall we say, suspect slash the guy, the killer of these four girls who were brutally raped and murdered in Austin, Texas, in 1991. Um, and the claim is at this point, and I say claim only because I don't have the details in front of me that they had done DNA testing before, but now that things have improved, they were able to link the DNA that they had from the crime scene to this guy. And considering he's a serial killer, not a bad link. I'm certainly not going to say it couldn't be that guy. It definitely could be that guy. I just don't have the exact information on how the DNA was processed and exactly how much links to him. So I just don't know exactly all the details of that. They also had, which is kind of interesting, they say there is let me see how this was worded here. He died in 1999, 8 years after this crime, in a suicide during a standoff with the police. The gun he used to shoot himself is believed to be consistent with a bullet casing found in a drain inside the yogurt shop. Well, he must have kept that gun for a long time, 8 years, which is kind of unusual for this kind of characters. And that was a 22, I believe. So do I absolutely believe the casing was absolutely the casing from his gun? Not so much, but the DNA would obviously be the thing that would absolutely link him to the crime. If what I'm hearing tonight, that the DNA is sufficient, this would be the guy. Now, I did a show on this prior to all this information, and I went through all the different suspects in the crime at the time, and these were the young men. They were teenagers, and two of them ended up getting convicted on just confessions, which I thought was some of the worst gotten confessions I've ever seen in a police interrogation. And they eventually did not match the DNA that was at the scene. And I never believed they did it. This crime was so horrific. It included robbery. It included tying up the girls. It included a bunch of rape. It included killing all the girls and setting a fire to the yogurt shop to eliminate the evidence. And I'm like, these four young boys, they could be losers. They could be committing other kinds of crimes. I would even believe they could commit like a wilding, which is where you chase somebody down because you're angry and you stab them to death. But this, I'm like, I don't believe so. I believe whoever, and you can go back and look at I'll link it below my profile on this. Whoever committed this crime, I said, had to be older and had to be already a criminal who was comfortable doing this kind of thing. And I also believe, because of the effort to set the place on fire, that the person who committed this, or persons, and I'll get into the persons issue in a second, I believe had problems in one of two ways before. They got identified by a victim that they left alive and went to prison for it, or they just had they've had trouble before and been in prison, but I believe they might have been identified by somebody. Turns out that's exactly who this guy had a problem with. He had a victim he raped and left alive. He shot her twice, but she just didn't die on him. And she identified him, and he did go to prison. So that matches quite well. I'm going to read you just a little bit about this guy. I'm going to tell you where there's missing things that I'd love to know more about, because there's some things which I am like, there's got to be more information here. There's got to be something, and there's not much on the internet. So I'm going to go to actually the place of the most right now, which is Wikipedia. It says very little is known about his early life. He was born in 1958, which puts him in his 30s at the time this crime was committed. So 1991, I'll see if I can do can't do my math. Wait a minute. 1991, 1958 to 1991. That's 33 years old. I would buy that. Now, I was born in Newport News. And anyway, he didn't do drugs or alcohol, it's interesting that many times serial killers do not. He enlisted in the Army, served several years. That means he probably didn't do too well. And then after he got out, he resigned from the Army. I'm going to say it because he probably was a psychopath and they wanted him out of there. And he moved to Louisiana, settling in a house in New Orleans. But by the mid-1980s, he was in Fort Myers, Florida. He married in 1990, in the 1990s, and he had a daughter with his wife in 1992, which so he was married prior to this, just prior to this, and he had a baby the year after. And then he also adopted 2 little girls. Poor kids. Anyway, now, in 1995, he was arrested on the charges of assaulting a 24-year-old woman named Michelle Wilkerson. So what he did was he met her and he convinced her to accompany him to a bar. After they had evening together, he took her to a dark alleyway in a citrus grove, and they drank 6 Budweisers together, and he attempted to make sexual advances on her, and she refused in an attempt to leave his vehicles when he started fighting with her and shot her in the neck and head. So, a bad date, Despite the severity of her injuries, she remained conscious, managed to leave the car, hid in a culvert under the road. Having lost track of her, Brashers went to the beach and threw his gun into the sea. He then attempted to leave, but his truck got stuck in the sand, which I find quite amusing. It's not very good at this point. And this is, what year is this again? I just want you to understand the years. 1985, and this is 1991. So this is his first known crime as far as attempted rape went, and shooting people in the head. He tried to leave. His truck got stuck, and he started walking around. And then she got to a nearby apartment building, and she got medical attention. And while she was being driven to the hospital, she described the assailant and his car in detail to the police officers. He was apprehended and charged with attempted first-degree murder, aggravated battery, and using a firearm during the commission of a crime. He was convicted the following year and sentenced to 12 years imprisonment. Oddly enough, they let him out after 4 years. Just love it when they give parole to this kind of character in 4 years. After he shoots somebody in the head. I don't know why that's not life right there. But anyway, that's what I believe. If he's truly the guy who did this, he got ratted out by a witness he left alive. So he learned his lesson, which is why these girls would all be dead after he committed the crime. All right. Then he did some more stuff. Now, after his release, let's see, his release was in 1989. So this was 2 years after his release. But there's nothing he wasn't known to have done this crime. He moved between the states of South Carolina, Tennessee, and Georgia. So he was not in Texas. And I want to know how he ended up in Austin, Texas, between the time he was released and the time he committed his next crime, which was 1992, that he got caught for. Where was he? Why was he in Texas? Austin, Texas, I looked on maps, and we're talking at least 10 hours away. And as far as I know, his family is not in the South. They're not in Texas. And he's got no movements in Texas. So I'm wondering how the heck he ended up in Austin, Texas. And I'm guessing there might be more information, which just hasn't come out yet. So he got nailed for grand theft auto, unlawful possession of a weapon, and theft. And then they searched his vehicle and they found a radio scanner, a police jacket, lock-picking tools, and a fake Tennessee driver's license. This guy's an all-around crap criminal. He does all kinds of stuff, not only rape. At this point, it was attempted rape and attempted murder. But not yet. Well, this was in between the girl who put him away and his next grand theft auto. So this was an unknown crime if he had done this crime. And then he made a plea deal, and they dropped the most serious of the charges, and he was sentenced to 5 years imprisonment, and he was released in 1997. And then in those next 2 years, he went between Tennessee, Arkansas, and Missouri, again, not in Texas. In 1998, he was arrested while attempting to break into the home of an unmarried woman in Arkansas. Having been employed by her on a previous occasion, he cut the wires leading to her home and was armed at the time of his arrest. A video camera, ox-smithing tools were seized from him as well. He was taken into custody and released. Doesn't even say they did anything about him. 1999, they noticed a stolen car had been parked in the parking lot of Super 8 Motel in Missouri, Kennett, Missouri. After speaking with personnel, they established that the Brasher and his family had arrived in that vehicle just days before. They broke down the door. Oh, I guess they posted bail for him, and then he ran. Okay, that's what happened. They broke down the door and found him hiding under a bed with a loaded gun. But when they attempted to arrest him, he resisted and opened fire. They retreated, and he took his own family as hostage. And then finally released him, but he attempted to shoot himself in the head, which he did shoot himself in the head. He lived for 6 days, and then he died. So it was ruled a suicide at that point. I guess he didn't want to go back to prison. Now, at this point in time, after he died, it wasn't until 2018 that they discovered through DNA that he was more than what had been seen. In other words, so far, he hadn't really done anything that bad. Only tried to rape, only tried to kill. But now he became a suspect in 3 murders and several rapes dating back to 1990. So now we're before this. This is 1991. Now we're back to 1990. All right. Let's see. There was a, let me find it. DNA testing revealed his genetic profile was a perfect match to the murder of 28-year-old Genevieve Jenny Zitricki, who'd been bludgeoned, raped, and strangled with pantyhose at her apartment in Greenville, South Carolina, which was an area he was in. That was on April 5th, 1990. So we're still 1 year prior to this, or whatever, in the year prior to this. At the time, it had been established that after murdering her in the bedroom, he dragged her body into a bathtub and submerged it before writing, "Don't fuck with my family," which I'm not even sure how she did, but okay. He put that on the bathroom mirror. Maybe he was just trying to send the police off thinking it was somebody to do with her. Anyway, they had isolated the DNA and uploaded it to CODIS, and that's how they got him for that murder. So now we have the first identified rape and murder in 1990, 1 year before this. Now, DNA also linked him to a double murder of 38-year-old Sherry Scherer and her 12-year-old daughter Megan, both of whom were found shot to death in a home in Missouri, Portageville, Missouri, in 1998. So now we're 7 years ahead of this. Both victims have been tied up, and Megan had been raped before Brashers shot and killed them both. That sounds more like this crime, doesn't it? Then 2 hours later, because he hadn't had a good enough time, he broke into another home in Tennessee. So he was moving, and attempted to assault a 25-year-old woman. That woman resisted. He fled, but eventually ballistics tied him to that. And then in 1997, 1997, he was linked to a rape of a 14-year-old girl in Memphis, Tennessee. Okay, so serial rapist, serial killer, extremely violent, used all kinds of methodologies, tied women up, raped them, shot them. Nasty piece of work. Matching this crime? Well enough. He had a 22, but so does half the population in certain places. A 22 is not so unusual. So although they said there was that casing that could have come from his 22, I maybe it's true. And maybe 8 years later, they matched it. I don't know whether they're using tool marks or what they're using, but wouldn't be enough to say he did it. Again, the DNA would be the thing. Now, there's one other issue. There was another gun used in the crime, which is a .380. It's very rare for somebody to come in like this with my 22 and my .380, and I'm going to handle all you women. I've got all these extra guns. And also, it's a lot of work with 4 women. Now, 2 women, a lot of times people say it has to be 2 people with 2 women. That's not true. You can easily, tell them to lay down. And if you move, I'll kill your friend or your mother or your daughter or whatever. And you can do so with 4. Can one man rape and kill 4 women? Sure. But there were 2 guns at the scene, and there were 2 male DNAs that were not. There's actually 3 male DNAs. The third DNA was, I think, I don't know if I'm looking at the pictures correctly. One of them had a boyfriend she had sex with. So that DNA came from the boyfriend. And they sort of knew how things went down because some of the stuff was transferred from body to body. But there were 2 male DNAs that were not the the girl's boyfriend. So to me, you got 2 guns, 2 different male DNAs. And also there were 2 men, which I always suspected might be the guys, were the last guys in the shop. They were kind of leaned over a table. And who were those guys who never admitted who they were? So those 2 guys were very likely the killers. So my questions are this at this point in time. I believe he had to have done this crime with somebody else. Who was the somebody else? And it's interesting because up until, well, before and after this crime, he seemed to work by himself. Most serial killers work alone. They don't have buddies to do this with. Why? Because they're kind of, it's their own little fantasy that they want to come true, and they do their thing and go home to their wife and kids or whatever. However, there are serial killer duos. Sometimes there are male-female serial killer duos, and more often there are double male duos. And something like, let's see, I'm trying to think off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm not going to figure it out. I've got too many killers in my head. But you'll get two, and you usually get a stronger one and a weaker one. Sometimes they're like cousins. So you have the one who's controlling everything, and then the other one goes along with the program because he thinks, well, okay, this is cool. I want to know who he was hanging around with in 1991, because I had that somehow he brought into his activities so that they went and killed these four young women. I would also like to know how he ended up in Austin, Texas. I don't have any clue whether he went there. Sometimes he disappeared apparently from home. I think that's what his daughter said. His daughter Debbie said that, well, 1997, she said he would just disappear and come back after a few weeks. So I wouldn't be surprised if he did that prior. So I want to know, what was he doing in Texas in 1991, and who was he with in Texas in 1991? Because I believe there has to be a second person in this crime due to 2 guns and 2 sets of unknown male DNA. And also the fact it's not that easy to keep 4 women under control. It helps to have a hand in it. And so very interesting, news. It's really awesome if they finally solve this crime, because these guys, I never believed did it, because again, it's not a teenage crime, and they would do to the level of the kind of thing they did. But this guy, absolutely, everything matches him as far as raping and violence, and that he would want to eliminate all witnesses because he'd had a witness testify against him and put him in prison. So I'm good with this guy as long as the DNA is accurate. It makes sense that it would be, but I just want to know who did it with him, because this definitely was a 2-guy crime. And I don't know if they're ever going to find out who the second guy is, but I would love to know what he was doing in 1991 to end up in Texas and have somebody hanging out with him who would want to participate in this kind of brutal crime. Absolutely fascinating case. But I'm happy for the families that it's only been how many years that they have never had an answer. And I'm also, those poor guys that were charged, that was egregious. So that they have maybe the right person now would be great. So anyway, that's my thoughts on this today. Thank you for being here. And if you're new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Check my playlists, and let's see what more information comes out. And I may come back and do another video when I start learning more about where he was in 1991 and who he was with. Thank you for being here. Bye-bye.